And here we go. Boxing has given us another great fight come September 30th as we're getting Undisputed versus Undisputed. Canelo Alvarez. Canelo, the legendary Canelo, the face of boxing Canelo, going up against Jermell Charlo, Lions only from Houston, Texas. The Iron Man, Jermell Charlo. We're getting Undisputed versus Undisputed. The 154 Undisputed Champion in Charlo. The 168 Undisputed Champion in Canelo. They're fighting at 168 for all of Canelo's straps. We're in for a great one, as fireworks are going to be flying come September 30th. This is the Never Drop Podcast. If you're listening on YouTube, watching on YouTube, go ahead, click that subscribe button. I got all type of content, as you can click and see, from fights, discussions about fights, all different things talking boxing. If you're listening on, say, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, go ahead, press that follow, and then why don't you go ahead and subscribe on YouTube also. This is the Never Drop Podcast. But right back to Undisputed versus Undisputed, man. This is going to be one heck of a fight come September 30th. Let's look at it, right? Canelo Alvarez. He's been the face of boxing, it feels like, for a while. He bust onto the scene when he was young. I believe he started professionally boxing around 17. You look at it, he's fought 61 times professionally. You see fighters nowadays have like 30, 40 maybe fights, and then they retire. He's fought 61 times, and it looks like he has no plans to stop. He's 33 years old. Canelo has been on the radar for boxing for, I think, a decade now. I think it was just the 10-year anniversary of him versus Mayweather. I believe I saw that. You think about that. That was the first time we were introduced to Canelo on like a mainstream level, of course. And he hasn't disappointed. He's fought Gennady Golovkin. He sold out AT&T Stadium doing close to 80,000 seats against, I believe, Billy Joe Saunders. I believe that was the Saunders fight in AT&T. Even his last fight in Mexico against John Ryder, which we'll talk about, did ridiculous amounts, as his fan base is not only in the U.S., global. He has the whole fan base of Mexico representing him, and he fights for them. On the flip side, you got Jermell Charlo. He's fighting for Houston, Texas. Charlo, it's been a row for him, overcoming a loss. He's overcome a draw. But what he is an undisputed champion at 154. Charlo fighting from Houston, Texas, of course. Brash, trash talking. This fight, he's been a little bit cooler. He understands the moment. This is Canelo we're talking about. This is the face of boxing. This isn't just a regular Joe that I'm fighting. This is Canelo Alvarez. I got to be mentally on my A game here. He's taken losses to Tony Harrison. He's drawed against Brian Castano. But in the rematch, when he's come back, he's left no doubt about it. He doesn't leave it up to the judges. He gets him out of there, knocking out Tony Harrison, knocking out Brian Castano, which we'll talk about. Charlo is a problem. And moving up to 168, he says the weight isn't going to be an issue. We'll talk about that. But man, this is going to be a great fight. A time for Canelo to silence the haters, as the haters have said he's fallen off. He's not the same Canelo. You can look at him. We'll talk about his last fight right here against John Ryder. I wasn't impressed. I was not impressed. A unanimous decision in Mexico. I do commend him for that. That was awesome. Fighting in Mexico for his hometown fans to see, because he's fought in Vegas so many times, because he's obviously the biggest draw in boxing. He said, I want to give my hometown fans a fight before I retire. And he did that. He put on a great show. But in the ring, it just didn't look like the same Canelo. Even the Triple G fight, the trilogy fight, the third fight last September, I believe, he didn't look that great, in my opinion. I thought that fight was a snooze fest, and part of that was because Triple G was so old. It just wasn't a good matchup anymore. But personally, Canelo hasn't been at the levels that we've seen him in those first couple Triple G fights, right? And of course, that's natural to happen with age as you've grown older. I've mentioned 61 fights. That takes a toll on your body. He's talked about he wasn't 100% healthy for those fights, right? But if that Canelo shows up against Jermell Charlo, he might be in for a long night, right? Jermell Charlo, he's a fighter that brings knockout power. And when he sees the opportunity, he's going for the knockout. He doesn't want to leave it to the judges. You look at him, he's 35-1-1. I'm talking about Charlo now. 19 KOs. Well, the 19 knockouts okay, that's a solid amount. Really, he's been knocking people out throughout his last few fights, honestly. You think about Castano, knocked out. Harrison, knocked out. When his back is against the rope, Charlo comes through with this power that you really can't believe. It's like, oh, yeah, he also has really good power on him. So he comes through with this power, and you're like, geez, where did that come from almost, right? But over time, he's really developed into, I'm going to knock these guys out. I talked about Canelo's kind of lackluster performance back in May. Jermell Charlo, he hasn't fought since May of 2022. Personally, I think this is going to be an issue in the fight. Don't get me wrong, the performance in May 2022 was incredible. KOing Brian Castano in the 10th round to claim Undisputed after drawing with him in the previous fight. It was a great fight. Then he was going to fight Tim Tszyu at 154, which I still want to see that fight. That'll be a really good fight if that ever happens. I believe he broke something in his hand, had to postpone, and then the payday against Canelo came, so I'm taking the payday against Canelo. Smart decision. I think that layoff in the ring, that might hurt him. What's that? That's almost 16 months out of the ring. Obviously sparring and stuff, but that doesn't compare. This is going to be Vegas. The biggest of the biggest, right, for this fight. I've never believed too much in ring rust, and then I saw Spence's performance against Terrence Crawford. And while I know a lot of people talk about weight drained, all this stuff, I really think ring rust was also a key component into why his performance there. And he had a similar layoff. He had fought in April of 2022 and then not again until July 2023. So it's kind of the same amount of time that Charlo has taken off or been off. He hasn't taken anything off because of injury and stuff. It's just that's the time he has been off. So I think that might be an issue. Charlo, he needs to move in this fight. He needs to create angles, I believe, to try and not trick Canelo, but keep Canelo on his toes. Canelo kind of wants to walk you forward. Say, oh, I can eat that. Let me impose my will. That Bivol fight, he felt the power of Bivol and it was just tough for him to get into a rhythm. If Charlo can do that, get into a rhythm. Keep moving, keep boxing. That can be a recipe for Charlo to win this fight. You think about it, Canelo moved up, I believe, Lake Tahoe to do his training. Usually he doesn't do his training there, but with the high altitude, he knows he's going to have to try and keep moving, trying to get that conditioning. Personally, I believe, to try and keep up with Charlo, because I think both sides know, Charlo's camp knows that I got to do this. I got to move. I got to keep the fight constant. Don't let Canelo get in the rhythm. And I think Canelo's side knows Charlo's going to try and move and not let us get in rhythm. Which side is going to demonstrate their game plan better? Right? It'll be interesting. It'll be really interesting to see who does what, try and put their foot on this fight, put their stamp on this fight. As I think, while Canelo has not looked good, the greats come out in the great moments, right? Great players make great plays. You know, that's a common saying. And I think he knows how big this moment, he's been in this moment before, right? Honestly, I think he's been in bigger moments. I think the Triple G fights 1 and 2 were bigger moments than this fight. Charlo's never been in a moment this big, and who knows if he will. Again, just because Canelo is almost as big as it gets. I anticipate Canelo to put on a really great performance. I expect him to really put up a great fight. While the weight is interesting to me because it's at 168, Charlo's moving up 2 weight classes to 168. He says it's no problem, that the size difference really doesn't mean too much. You look at him, Charlo's 6 foot, Canelo's 5'8", so Charlo has the height advantage, which we saw in the weigh-in, or excuse me, not the weigh-ins, the press conferences when they went to face-to-face. Charlo looked taller. Charlo has a 2.5-inch reach advantage, 73-inch reach for Charlo, 70.5-inch reach for Canelo. So that can be something if Charlo wants to try and work him with the jab. Keep him on the outside while he moves, creating angles on the inside. That can be a game plan for Charlo. But personally, I just don't know about the weight. I'm a Jermell Charlo fan. I don't know about the weight for this. This is a lot. And I talked about he wants to keep moving for 12 rounds, right? Putting on that much weight and then trying to keep the same stamina, keep the same conditioning. Obviously, I know he's been conditioning for a while now. I think that's just a really tough task for Charlo to try and do that, all while having a great IQ trying to outbox one of the best boxers we've seen this generation in Canelo. I think he's got to do a lot to try and beat Canelo here. Canelo just has to beat Canelo, have a good, great, vintage Canelo performance, which is a lot to ask, right? But I think that's easier for him to do than Charlo to do all these different things, right? I think Charlo needs a combination of different things to help him get this win, while Canelo kind of just needs to be the Canelo that we know and have watched for years. And that's why in this fight, while I'm a Charlo fan, I'm a big Charlo fan, I think I'll be leaning more towards Canelo in this fight. I think I'm going Canelo with the unanimous decision. I don't see him having the power to get Charlo out of there, only because the hand injuries he's suffered and just the old age. I think Charlo has a good chin. Charlo does have a good chin, so I don't see him necessarily getting Charlo out there with a knockout, but I can see him outboxing Charlo and kind of frustrating Charlo if he doesn't allow Charlo to get into a rhythm in different angles and keep him on the outside and get in and out real quick. I can see Charlo getting really frustrated and maybe in his own head, and Canelo takes advantage of that. So I think for this fight, just the weight, all the different things I think playing against Charlo in this fight, I'm going to go Canelo by unanimous decision. I think this is going to be a really good fight, though. I think Charlo's going to put on a good performance. I know I've talked about he needs to do this, all this to get the fight, to get the win. But I think he's going to do a lot of good things in this fight. And he's going to put up one heck of a performance. And for Charlo, he needs to get Canelo out of there. It's going to be hard because we've seen Canelo go up against great punchers and really hasn't fazed him too much. Charlo's going to have to do something different to try and get Canelo out of there, because I think the longer it goes, the more it favors Canelo. I just think the IQ of Canelo, he's been in these positions before. I really think that experience and him being at 168, close to what his weight is, heck, it might just be his weight class. Obviously, he's undisputed there, but he jumps all the time. I think 168 really is where Canelo feels comfortable. I think that'll just play really to Canelo's advantages, and he'll get the unanimous decision win, I'm thinking. But every time I keep thinking about this fight, it gets closer and closer. For a while, I've thought, oh, Canelo wins this one. Not easily, but he wins this one comfortably. But as we get closer to the fight, I'm growing more and more confident in my guy Charlo to really make this fight and potentially pull an upset. It would be one heck of an upset. And to think if Charlo gets undisputed, wins this fight, and is undisputed at 168 also, that would be something. And we can't forget about what's looming for the winner. Maybe a potential fight with Terrence Crawford. That's something we'll talk about later on in another video. But this is going to be a great one, man. Boxing, I say this every podcast, it just keeps on delivering. And September 30th, we're getting a great one. Make sure you tune in. Canelo versus Charlo. It's not going to disappoint. This one's not going to disappoint, as really these big fights haven't this year. This has been the Never Drop Podcast, man. Make sure, I appreciate it if you're still listening. Subscribe on YouTube. Never Drop Podcast. I'm dropping podcast about breakdowns of fights, post-fights, what happened, just videos in general, getting you your boxing information. If you're listening still on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, go ahead, follow me, and then go subscribe on YouTube. It's just the Never Drop Podcast. I got videos from me at Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia, Spence Crawford, I was there. Go watch all those videos, man. I appreciate you. That's all I got. Peace. I'm out.